It's the year 1666, and in the heart of the narrow streets of London on Pudding Lane, an event is unfolding that would forever change the city's landscape. This is the story of the Great Fire of London. Water was scarce and the houses, mostly made from wood with thatched roofs, had dried out. London was suffering from a drought after having a long dry summer. Dry weather, strong winds and flammable building materials made it a recipe for disaster. Thomas Fariner joined the Bakers' Company in 1637, which was a sort of guild made up of bakers that initially started in the 12th century. And by the year 1649 he had his own shop. His bakery was located on Pudding Lane, and at the time of the fire he was a well-known baker in the City of London. His bakery provided bread for the Royal Navy during the Anglo-Dutch War. In the early hours of the 2nd of September he was awakened by smoke coming under the door of his bedroom, and downstairs in his bakery the fire had started from a small spark and his house had caught fire. He managed to escape out of an upstairs window with his daughter, but his maid, who refused to take the same path because she was scared of falling, eventually died in the fire and became the first victim of the Great Fire of London. At the time, fires were a common occurrence, so it wasn't initially that concerning, but the fire moved extremely quickly down Pudding Lane to Fish Hill and towards the River Thames, where it met oil and tallow stocked warehouses, which, as you can imagine, are very combustible. People in the neighbourhood attempted to extinguish the fire, but they were unsuccessful and couldn't stop the blaze marching through the city. This created panic and chaos as people tried to escape and save their belongings. The way they would fight fires in the 17th century was a technique called fire breaking, which is where they would remove structures in the path of the fire using gunpowder to bring them down. The Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was indecisive with his decision on removing those structures to prevent the fire spreading, and this delay was critical. By the time he made the decision to start demolishing buildings, it was too late. Samuel Pepys, who was a diarist and a naval administrator for the Royal Navy, kept detailed accounts of the ongoings at the time with his diary entries. He provided first-hand accounts of the Great Fire of London, along with the Restoration, the Second Anglo-Dutch War and the Great Plague of 1665. On Sunday morning, Samuel Pepys ascended the Tower of London to view the fire from the battlements. In his diary he recorded that the eastern gale had destroyed an estimated 300 houses and had reached the riverfront. He then took a boat to inspect the damages around Pudding Lane and described it as lamentable. People were removing their goods and throwing them into the river, and the poor people were staying in their houses until the fire basically got within touching distance. The fire spread quickly and people started abandoning the attempt to extinguish it and started to flee. The sheer mass of people fleeing with their carts and bundles made the narrow streets impossible for firemen and carriages to get through. Pepys found Bloodworth coordinating the efforts to fight the fire, and in the diary, Pepys states that in response to the King's message, he was pulling down the houses and did so like a fainting woman, with Bloodworth stating, "But the fire overtakes us faster than we can do it." Late Sunday evening, the fire had travelled 1,600 feet along the river, and throughout Monday it spread to the north and the west. The south was safer because it was halted by the river, but it had still torched some of the houses on London Bridge. Towards the north of the city was Lombard Street, where the bankers lived, and on Monday afternoon the fire was raging so close that it started to burn the bankers' houses, which prompted a rush to gather their gold coins before they melted. Bloodworth was meant to be coordinating the firefighting, but he had apparently left the city with his name not mentioned in any of Monday's recorded accounts. With Bloodworth leaving and the city being in a state of panic, King Charles put his brother James, the Duke of York, in charge of operations. He set up command posts around the perimeter of the fire, with people put in charge of each post with the authority to order demolitions. Through all of Monday, James protected the foreigners from the mobs on the streets and kept order, riding up and down the streets with some of his guards. By mid-morning on Tuesday, the fire had reached the luxury shopping street of Cheapside. James's firefighters created a logged firebreak to the north of the fire. With this, the fire started moving east towards the Tower of London and its gunpowder stores. The garrison at the tower created firebreaks also, blowing up many houses in the area, stopping the fire advancing. Many seeked refuge in St Paul's Cathedral because of its thick stone walls, so it was stacked full of rescued goods. However, at that time it was undergoing restoration by Christopher Wren and had wooden scaffolding around it, and on Tuesday night it caught fire, and within 30 minutes the lead roof was melting and all of the books and papers in the crypt were burning, sending the cathedral into ruin. By Wednesday morning the fire breaks had started to take effect. Pepys climbed the Barking Church steeple to view the destroyed city and described the view as the saddest sight of desolation that I ever saw. North of the city there was a huge encampment of homeless refugees, full of distressed people that had been reduced to extreme misery and poverty. Smaller fires were still burning, but the Great Fire was over. The mood was extremely volatile, and Charles was concerned about there being a rebellion against the monarchy. Charles organised for supplies of bread to be brought into the city daily, and markets were set up around the perimeter. It is estimated that 87 churches, 13,200 houses and other structures were destroyed, and around 70,000 people lost their homes. There were rumours going around the city that the fire was no accident. Unrelated house fires started to break out away from the source, and people thought the fires were being set on purpose. Because of the Second Anglo-Dutch War, foreigners were suspected of causing the fires, and reports circulated of an imminent invasion, while undercover agents were supposedly seen casting fireballs into houses or caught with hand grenades and matches, and this is where Hubert came in. After the fire, Fariner rebuilt his bakery in Pudding Lane, and he and his children signed the bill that falsely accused a French watchmaker named Hubert of starting the fire. His confession kept changing, and throughout his trial he wasn't really convincing, after making claims about things that never happened. It is said that he wasn't even in London at the time. He was described as not well in the mind and unable to understand what he was doing. He was also afflicted by a palsy to his leg and arm. There's a source that claimed the confession was coerced by an extreme form of torture, but regardless, it is widely accepted that he was innocent. He was only accused upon his own confession, and he was hung for it on the 27th October 1666. Because of the fire, there was an act that was passed for the rebuilding of the city, which stated that all new buildings had to be constructed of brick or stone to stop any future fires causing as much devastation as it did. Christopher Wren was the architect involved in reconstructing the city and the new St Paul's Cathedral. His vision for London was to remove the narrow streets and have wide avenues. After the fire, as mentioned, new regulations were put in place and a plan was made for rebuilding the city, with the buildings being made of stone and brick. Along with that, you could only have a set amount of stories in each building to avoid overcrowding. The devastation throughout London was estimated at £10 million in damage, which in today's money is about £1.5 billion, and from the ashes rose an unlikely development: the world's first insurance policies. In 1680, the first insurance company was set up, called Fire Office, by Nicholas Barbon. After this, more insurance companies were created, and by 1690, 1 in 10 houses in London were insured. A few little side thoughts and comments around this. I've often wondered, with the year being 1666 and having so much devastation and the obvious connection with fire, if there was any link to why the number of the beast is 666, but it doesn't necessarily seem so. 666 is recorded in the book of Revelation as the year of the beast, but that seems mostly the extent of it. A little further research, however, shows that 1666 was the first recorded use of the phrase "speak of the devil." Another interesting thing that happened 100 years earlier in France was a prediction from Nostradamus. He had predicted that the fire would happen, stating, "The blood of the just will be lacking in London, burnt up in the fire of 66. Reflecting on the events of the Great Fire of London, the fire consumed thousands of homes and landmarks. However, amidst the destruction, the fire sparked a transformation. This led to new building regulations, visionary designs from architects like Christopher Wren, and a renewed focus on fire safety. London is a city of great history and reinvention. Its people embraced the challenges, and from the smouldering ruins, it emerged stronger than ever. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to this channel for similar content, and I'll see you soon.